Welcome to today's video. So in today's video, I'm going to talk to you guys all about C-sections. So I want to share my experience of C-sections with you guys, whether that be the actual procedure, the recovery, your second, your third. So I have had 3 C-sections and yeah, I feel like I know a little bit about them maybe because I have had 3 different ones as well. So every C-section is different, which is the first point to make. But I thought I'd run through each of my C-sections, each of my recovery, and then I have been asked some questions that I will answer at the end. I will say there will be background noise. Obviously, we're all at home at the moment. If you're new to my channel, I have 4 children and Jordan, my husband, is in charge of them all at the moment, so there will be noise, okay? I can't get away from it at the moment. I did try and film this video in the dining room because it has like a nice backdrop, but impossible. So here I am in my bedroom just because this is the quietest place in the house. I can shut the door and maybe no one will open it and try and find me, but we'll see. So let's rewind back to my first C-section. So I was 42 weeks pregnant with Jensen and I was overdue obviously, and I had high blood pressure, so I was induced because I was overdue and I had high blood pressure, and it was a failed induction. So without going into loads of detail, which is probably irrelevant in this video as this video is about C-sections, I had the hormone drip and my body would just naturally not go into labour. So the amount of drugs they had to give me to make me contract was distressing to the baby. So Jensen's heart rate kept dropping really low, and it kept dropping around 3 times I think, and on the 3rd time the buzzers went off and that was me down for an emergency C-section. So I actually do remember the fear that came over me during that moment. My mum had had a C-section, so it wasn't like I was completely alien to it, but I do remember the fear that came over me during that point, like, oh my goodness, I'm about to be rushed down to theatre and I'm going to be cut open and I'm not 100% sure what's going on. So yeah, if you've been through that, I'm sure you know the feeling. But the staff, the medical staff, I think across the board, this kind of goes without saying that in the UK, we are so very lucky to have such amazing medical staff, and the doctors and nurses and midwives, and especially the anaesthetists, really put you at ease. And the reason I kind of focus on the anaesthetist is because they're with you the whole time. I'm not sure what their actual role is in the C-section, apart from the obvious, whether they're meant to stay with you the whole time and that's part of their role, I'm not sure. But in my experience, they have stayed with me up the head end the whole time. And I remember my first emergency C-section where I wasn't so relaxed. The anaesthetist spoke me through the procedure. He was like, okay, so now they're cutting you open, now they are pulling the baby out. He spoke me through it all and it really put me at ease. So that was fantastic. So because I was being induced, I had the option to have an epidural anyway. So I'd already been numbed, but when you have a C-section, you have to have that numbing topped up and you have to have an anaesthetist there with you the whole time. I think I've always had that, so I just assume that is practice. So they numbed me completely just with more epidural. I think they might have put something different in. At that point, I wasn't really concentrating on what was going into my body. I was more concentrating on trying to stay focused and make sure the baby comes out safe. So yeah, I'm not really sure the medication they give me. I know I already had an epidural. I'm assuming they just kind of top that up and maybe put something else in me. But that was that. I had my C-section, and my first experience of the actual procedure of a C-section, in my opinion, is completely fine. The only thing that panicked me during that whole thing was the fact it was an emergency C-section and I was worried in myself. It wasn't anything to do with the procedure or anything they did, it was just the situation. So the actual C-section thing was completely fine. afterwards I felt sick. You scared me then. Talking of C-section, baby, someone was spying on me through the door. I'm talking about how you come into the world.
Huh?
Do you know how you come into the world?
I know.
How did the doctors get you out my tummy?
I don't know.
You do know.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. What did the doctors do to my tummy to get you out?
Cut it open.
Cut it open. Yeah. What I'm talking about. Nice little cameo appearance from Jensen as I relive my C-section 6 years ago. So after I had my C-section, I felt really sick. And I don't know why. I guess because because it was an emergency C-section, I didn't get my anti-sickness drugs. So that may have been why. I don't actually know, I never asked, but I felt really sick and I was being sick everywhere, so that can be a potential side effect of maybe just an emergency C-section, because I never had it with any of my planned sections. But I do want to stress, everyone's cesarean section is going to be completely different to someone else's, so me sharing this doesn't mean it's going to happen to you. It just gives you maybe a bit of an insight as to what it might be like for you. So my recovery after my first C-section was really good, actually, in hindsight. So I stayed in bed, so my C-section was around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I stayed in bed until the following morning, so you have a catheter in and you're pretty numb. I didn't actually realise you did have the option to get out of bed, but that wasn't until my third C-section. I figured that out, so I will come to that. But I stayed in the bed until the morning, and I remember the healthcare assistant come round to my bedside and said, would you like to get up and have a shower? And I thought, okay. At that point, I was absolutely not prepared for what was about to happen. Pain-wise, I did wake up in the middle of the night around 2 AM, and I did feel like the pain hit me like a train. And if you've ever been through it, especially your first time, because you're so unprepared, and with my second and third I did it completely differently, but I was so unprepared and I felt like I've been hit by a train, and all I wanted to do at that point was go home. I'd been in hospital a week prior, which is a completely different story to do with high blood pressure, so at that point I just wanted to get home. And I remember asking for pain relief, and they said you can have pain relief in the form of Oromorph, but if you take it, you then have to stay in for another 24 hours or something along those lines. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, no, I can't do that. So I didn't take the Oromorph, and I was just taking paracetamol and ibuprofen, which is actually quite powerful when you realise the pain you're in without them. But yeah, so the pain was definitely there, and when I stood up to get out of bed, oh my goodness, I think that is up there with one of the most painful experiences in my entire life. And I don't usually cry much at pain. I don't know, I'm not really that kind of person that will burst into tears. Obviously I do cry, but not loads and loads. But I did cry. I stood up and I cried because the pain was agony. It really was agony for me, and I think the main thing was that I just didn't expect it. I just didn't expect it to be so painful, and I don't know why. It's because I didn't know what was happening. So yeah, I managed to get up and I managed to have a shower, but wow, that was very painful, and that intense pain continued for around 3 days. And then after 3 days, I just kind of went like that in my recovery, that the pain really started to subside. I didn't need to take loads of painkillers, and I was managing it really, really well. So that is the story of my first C-section and recovery. I also thought I'd mention the whole epidural thing, because obviously I'd had an epidural before I knew I was going to have a C-section. And was it painful? In my opinion, not really. And I remember my mum had always said that to me, because we'd discussed childbirth and labour and epidurals and things like that, and she said to me, it's really not that painful. And it really wasn't, in my opinion. They numb your back, in my experience. They numbed my back first before they put the epidural in. So that is what you feel. You feel the anaesthetic going into your back. So the needle goes in and then you're pretty much numbed. It really wasn't that painful, so you really don't need to worry about that. And one of my friends is due to have a C-section and she's really panicking about the whole numbing injection, but it is so not that bad in my experience, and that's all I can talk about. I can only talk about my own experience. Other people might feel differently, but from my experience, it's really not that painful. So because I had the first C-section and it was an emergency C-section and it was a failed induction and I had high blood pressure and all that kind of stuff, I really didn't want to go through that again. I really didn't. So I had an appointment with a consultant, and that was to discuss a possible elective C-section for my second birth. It was either an elective C-section or a VBAC, and I really don't know much about VBAC, so this is not the video for me to be giving you information on VBACs because I've never had one and I'm not a doctor, so I don't know much about VBACs. But I knew personally I would prefer an elective section than to have it emergency again, then to have a failed induction again, then to go through high blood pressure again, because my high blood pressure came on when I was overdue in my first pregnancy. So I really wanted to avoid all of that, because I did struggle for a while after my first, just with my emotions a bit. I had the baby blues, and I believe that being in hospital for a week prior to my birth, my high blood pressure, the worries that surrounded that, and my emergency C-section, my failed induction, could have potentially contributed to me having quite a bad case of the baby blues and not feeling good at all. I really wanted to eliminate all of those risks and go for a planned C-section. Lucky enough for me, the consultant completely agreed and completely understood where I was coming from, and due to my high blood pressure risk, due to the failed induction and the risk of it happening again, I was put forward for an elective C-section. So I went in for my elective C-section. This was 2.5 years after my first section, and because I'd been through it before, I felt really chilled out. I'm quite a chilled out person anyway, like I get that a lot. My friends and family are like, you are so chilled out, and I just am. About most things, not about everything. So I was feeling really chilled out. I went in the morning, I think I went in around 9 AM for my elective C-section, and it didn't actually happen until 5 PM that afternoon. I was last on the list, and yeah, I went in for my C-section, and obviously I had to have, I think it's a spinal block. I don't know the difference between an epidural and a spinal block, so I do apologise for my lack of knowledge there, but I had the injection in my back, and again, I knew it wasn't going to be that painful. Of course you're nervous at that time, but it was really straightforward. It went straight in, no issues, and I laid down and I was ready for my elective C-section. Now the whole procedure is actually very similar to your emergency C-section. I found the procedure pretty much the same. So even though you're having an emergency C-section, they still have to follow protocol and they still have to do things in the same kind of way. Maybe it's a bit more rushed. I'm obviously not 100% sure, but in my experience, the procedure was pretty much the same. I was completely numb. I didn't feel a thing. One of the questions I got asked was, do you genuinely not feel anything? And you genuinely don't feel anything. I didn't anyway. I didn't feel a thing. I was completely comfortable, and I had my elective C-section, and I felt $1 million afterwards. I had no kind of low mood. I bonded really well with my baby, and I just felt great. Probably because I felt like I had a little bit of control over myself, over the procedure. I had loads of support from, again, the anaesthetists, the doctors, the midwives, and yeah, I just felt completely great. So if you're wondering whether to have an elective C-section, in my experience, I had the best experience. So yeah, recovery wise though was very different to my first section. Now my mum had always said to me, because she had 2 sections, that your second recovery can be worse, and I was thinking, what's she on about? It won't be worse, it'll be exactly the same, because a midwife has said to me, oh, your second recovery will be so much better. But my mum was actually right, okay. I took a lot longer to recover from my second C-section, but it was so different in the fact that I stood up out of bed in the morning, again, had my catheter overnight, and I got up out of bed in the morning, and I could deal with the pain a lot better the second time around, because I because I think I knew what was coming, I knew to keep on top of my paracetamol, ibuprofen, I dealt with that initial pain so much better than I did the first time. But it was kind of like my first C-section pain like spiked and then went down. I felt like with my second C-section pain, it kind of was progressive, that it got painful before it got better. So I went home after 24 hours because I did that with my first baby and I was fine, and I thought I'd be fine the second time around, but I was so wrong because I was not managing the pain as well as I did the first time around. And whether that was because I had 2 children to look after or whether that was because my recovery just took longer, I don't know, but I felt like I was in so much more pain the second time around. I couldn't even sit up. I laid in bed and I remember Jesse was crying, that's my second son, and I couldn't sit up in bed to look after him. So me and Jordan had to swap places in the bed that night, and he had to look after the newborn baby and I just had to kind of like help him verbally because I could not sit up. The next day it turned out Jesse had jaundice, so we actually went back into hospital for another 2 days, and I can't tell you the relief I actually felt when that happened, because when I was in hospital I could use the hospital bed to sit myself up and down, and it was just so much easier to control that pain and manage it and manage looking after the baby. So it was completely different to my first time. So yeah, I guess it's quite interesting to have those 2 different scenarios, because if someone said to me that they were really struggling after their C-section and I only had 1 C-section and had a really good experience, I probably couldn't relate, and I'd be thinking, but why? I was fine. Every C-section recovery is completely different, and with my second section recovery it took me a full 6 weeks to feel okay again and be able to walk like a distance and just feel okay without having to take painkillers as often as I could. The second time also took my scar a lot longer to heal as well. Maybe that's because they recut open the first scar, but the first time my scar literally healed perfectly and my stomach healed perfectly, had no stretch marks. It went back to how it was basically pre-pregnancy. But with my second, it did not at all. My scar took a lot longer to heal and it was just a lot more angry. And then my stomach, not this is about my stomach at all, but I got stretch marks and I got the whole C-section, what do you call it? What's the name for it? Fold? I don't know, where your skin kind of indents where your scar is. So that happened to me on the second C-section. And it did take me actually, I'd say a good few months to kind of get my head around that. I remember looking in the mirror at my body thinking, oh, it just looks so awful. I hate the way I look. I remember speaking to Jordan and being like, I hate the way I look so much. I'm really unhappy with my stomach. I'm really unhappy with my scar area. But after a few months, I just got used to it. And I just got used to seeing that in the mirror and it stopped making me feel unhappy. Don't get me wrong, I didn't look in the mirror and think, oh, I love the way I look, I feel amazing, but it stopped making me feel unhappy. And I think that was kind of key to me feeling okay in myself and feeling body confident. I love the fact that high-waisted bikinis and swimsuits are really in, and that's what I'm always going to wear now. I just wouldn't feel confident wearing something so low cut where the whole kind of C-section overhang is there, and yeah, it's just not for me. And I like to wear underwear that's quite supportive and kind of gives support to that area, things that kind of flatter that area rather than accentuate the area. But it's something I'm completely used to now, and yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. Obviously I don't love it about myself, but my stomach and my C-section scar has given me 4 children, so I can't hate it because it's given me the most amazing things in my life, and I just live with it and it really doesn't bother me. And the reason it doesn't bother me is just time. And yeah, so that is how I feel about my C-section scar. and my stomach, and then moving on to my third C-section. So with my third pregnancy, it was a twin pregnancy. So when you're pregnant with twins, you do have the potential to have a C-section anyway. Because I had had 2 previous C-sections, it was kind of a no-brainer. I was going to have a third C-section with the twins. It also turned out that one of the twins was transverse across my stomach anyway, so a C-section was the preferred method by the medical professionals. So my twin C-section, was it any different to my normal C-section, like procedure wise? And the answer to that is no. Again, the same as the emergency, the elective and the twin C-section. Procedure wise, they are all pretty much the same, and what happens in there is the same as any other time, apart from obviously if it is an emergency C-section, there may be some more panic in the room. Not something I really witnessed apart from the way I felt myself. I wasn't really paying attention to how other people felt, but obviously in myself I felt panicked, and then in my 2 elective C-sections after that I felt really calm. And the way you feel obviously impacts how you're going to feel afterwards as well. So again, I had to have the spinal block for my third C-section, and just to mention, I've been awake for all of my C-sections. I didn't have to get put to sleep. So I have my spinal block, and on my third C-section, the anaesthetist could not get the needle where it needed to go. I think it's a very specific area where the needle needs to go. So that time, do you know what, even that time I wouldn't say it was that painful, but it was just quite tense, and I had to keep reminding myself to try and relax while he was putting the needle in my back. I think it took about 4 or even 5 attempts to get it in the right place, and each time you feel it go in and then you'd feel it come out again and you'd know it wasn't right and then have to do it again. But I'd do it all again and it really wasn't that bad. Jordan was with me, I was holding his hand, probably squeezing his hand to death. So that was the only thing that was a little bit different about my third C-section. Again, I had the anaesthetist next to me, talking me through everything that was going on, and I was just really excited because I'd been through it all before, and I knew it was my last C-section. I did at that point. Obviously I've got 4 children, I don't want any more children. I think 5 would be pushing it for me. So I was just really excited, and I was actually really happy in my C-section, and I was chatting away to the anaesthetist, to the doctor, and obviously Jordan was with me, and we were just really happy, and we were kind of on cloud 9. So we got past the twins, and I got sewn up, and again, of course, you don't feel that bit either. I didn't feel any of it. And then I got wheeled into recovery, and this bit was a little bit different to my previous sections. So me and Jordan were really happy, and I feel like it's because we'd been through it before. This was my third section. I knew what to expect, I knew what was coming, and I just felt really blessed that I had 4 healthy children. We were on cloud 9 and we were laughing and giggling, and the nurse was actually kind of concerned. She was like, one of the nurses, the other one was fine, but she was a bit like, what? Whoa, you're really happy. And yeah, she just kind of didn't like the fact that I was feeling so good. She kept saying, you're gonna crash in a minute, you're gonna crash, your mood is gonna come down, and you're gonna crash. Like, it's not normal to be this happy. And I don't know if that's because maybe in C-sections the most common are emergency first C-sections, and most people are not in the best way when they come out of there, that she wasn't used to seeing someone like smiling and being so happy. But she really kept telling me I was going to crash, and that was very unhelpful, because I kept thinking, oh, is this not real then? Am I going to crash? Am I going to, you know, suffer with the baby blues again? Why does she keep saying this to me? And I was getting really confused, but I brushed it off because I was right. I wasn't going to crash, and I don't feel like she should have kept telling me that I was wrong for being happy, because I had been there. I had been that lady after my emergency C-section that felt awful emotionally and physically and everything else, and was struggling with everything, and that was me. I'd been there. And the reason I felt so happy on my third C-section is because I'd come so far from being this person, and I had dealt with that, and I was now coping and managing. And yeah, I guess she didn't realise that I had been that person, and I had felt so low after my C-section and would burst out crying for no reason at all when I hardly cry anyway. And like, that had been me, and I just felt so happy that I was dealing with the situation and I was coping, and I was just on cloud nine. And yeah, she really didn't like that, but that's kind of besides the point. I just thought I'd share that in case anyone is going to go through something similar in the contrast to an emergency C-section, and then you're going to feel completely different after on your elective C-section. Don't let anyone tell you that you shouldn't be happy and you shouldn't be smiling and laughing after your C-section, because you can, and it's completely fine. Both ways are fine. It was fine that I felt so rubbish after my first C-section, because with a bit of time I come out of that and I felt okay, but it's also fine to feel happy after a C-section. Just like a vaginal delivery, you're going to feel different after every delivery, and various different reasons are going to impact that. So C-section recovery wise for the third time was again different to my first and my second. I got out of bed much quicker third time around because my twin girls were taken down to NICU. So they were in NICU and I wanted to express my milk for them. So to do that, a midwife can take it down for you, but I wanted to see them. I really wanted to go down to NICU. I wanted to be with them. So after I had my C-section, I got out of bed, I think it was 5 hours after. I don't know exactly, but I think it was around 5 hours after I had the girls. I got out of bed and Jordan helped me, obviously, and he put me into the wheelchair, and I'd say that the pain was kind of like my second C-section. I knew what was coming, and I felt okay. I could kind of manage it. And yeah, so he put me in this wheelchair and wheeled me down to NICU. But because we have 2 other children at home, Jordan could not stay in hospital with me because I wanted him to be with the boys at home. I knew they were missing me, so I preferred it if he was actually back at home. And if you've been in hospital, you know how busy the staff are, and I hated asking people for help. I just knew they were busy doing other things, so I actually would walk myself down to NICU a day after I had my C-section, and that was really tough. That was really tough, but I kind of had to do it. So I remember I'd just make sure I was really topped up on my painkillers, and yeah, the only problem was when I was down in NICU, you miss the drug round. So, and I don't think the NICU nurses can give you drugs, so you miss the drug round, meaning that you will potentially miss your painkiller kind of slot. So that definitely happened to me a few times, and I was in agony walking back to the ward, because it was quite a walk, especially when you've had a C-section, to get from the ward down to NICU. So that was interesting, but I managed, and I just kept on top of my painkillers. I remember around day 3, I think, or day 4, day 3 to 4, the girls come back up on the ward with me, and I was so relieved because I knew I could just rest and recover, because when they were on NICU I couldn't, because I kept having to go up and down. But when they were with me in the room, I knew I could physically recover much better. So yeah, it was such a relief at that point. And then my third C-section recovery was pretty good. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't as straightforward as my first recovery, but it wasn't as long as my second recovery. I'd say it took around 4 weeks for me to stop having to take regular painkillers and feel okay with kind of being up and about. It's also important to mention, because I remember Googling this like mad when I was due to have my second elective C-section. How am I going to look after a toddler, a baby, and recover from a C-section? I was just really panicking because my husband was obviously due to go back to work after my elective C-section the second time around, and I didn't know how I was going to cope with a toddler and a baby and recover from a C-section. But I just want to throw it out there, okay, that you just do. you just cope, and I don't know how you kind of do it, but you just do. Keep on top of your painkillers, accept help, accept as much help as possible. My mum and my sisters were always amazing at that. And also, don't have any kind of expectations. I guess it all depends on your toddler. I feel like I was very lucky in the fact Jensen, my toddler at the time, would be very happy just doing really chilled things. So he'd be happy kind of sat playing with his toys, he'd be happy watching TV, which really helped me in my recovery, the fact I could just take it really easy. Now that would be completely different if you had a child that wasn't happy doing that, or that was at a different age. Maybe they'd be at an age where you still have to be really physical with them. So I can totally appreciate how that is hard for different people. I was very lucky in the fact that my toddler was super chilled, so I could recover, but I was really worried about it still. I remember Googling it and trying desperately to find some information about it, but I couldn't really find any. But the boys were outside. But I did manage, and I think Jordan took the full 2 weeks paternity at that point. It feels like so long ago that I can't remember fully, but with my first baby, he only had a week paternity. With my second, he took the full 2 weeks off just to help me recover. Just take any help that is available and lower your expectations. You are not going to be out and about doing all of the things. Just put your recovery as top as a priority as you can. Obviously, I know you can't really do that when you have other children to look after, but do prioritise it as much as you can. I'm now going to answer a few questions that were asked to me about having a C-section. So, how long do you stay in after having a C-section? And that is different for everyone. So with the twins, I stayed in for around 5 days, but that was actually because they were premature, and for them, not for me. The minimum is 24 hours, and I believe it's kind of maybe up to you, and you can discuss it with your midwife. I know my friend had a C-section and she stayed in for nearly a week, so it's completely different. And I do think it depends on your preference. If you're having a really hard time with your recovery, which I can appreciate some people really will, then you can stay in for longer. But I think it's all pretty individual and is discussed with a doctor and the midwives. If you are really struggling and you don't want to go home, then speak to them and tell them that, and vice versa. If you do want to go home, then communicate that with them as well, and they will try and do the best for you. The prep hospital procedure. A lot of people have asked about the preparation, and I feel like I can't really remember how exactly it goes. I know you go down, you get in your gown, and you then have a cannula in your hand, and then you have the anaesthetic in your back, and then you have the spinal block or epidural or whatever they use to do it, and I think that's it. Then you kind of lie down and then they just go for it. I might be missing something out majorly, so don't take my word as gospel. Definitely ask your midwife if you're concerned about it, because I'm sure they'll have way more information. But yeah, I feel like I don't really remember that part very well. But the answer to is it hard to care for your baby after is it's different for everyone. With my first C-section, I found it pretty easy to care for Jensen whilst I had my C-section. But as mentioned, with my second C-section, my recovery took a lot longer and was a lot more painful, and I was a lot less mobile. So that was harder for me to look after my baby. So in hindsight, I should never have left hospital 24 hours after. I should have known and I should have stayed in. So that was my own fault, and that's why with the twins I did it differently and I didn't rush out. Even though they wouldn't have been allowed to rush out, I knew in my head I wasn't going to rush out. So yeah, I wanted to make sure that I was completely in control of my pain before I left hospital. So the first time I was in control of my pain. The second time I wasn't in control of my pain, but I still left because I thought I'd be okay, but I wasn't. And then the third time I was in control of my pain before I left hospital. So I would say be in control of your pain before you leave, just because it'll make things a lot easier for you. In hospital you have the electric bed which you can sit up and down, so it makes it pretty simple to look after your baby. I could pick him up and do everything with the baby. I didn't need any help that way. But everyone is going to be different. How long did Jordan have to help picking up the baby before you were able to do it yourself? I picked my babies up from day one. I never didn't pick up the babies. With my second recovery, as I said, that first night I went home, Jordan had to help because I physically couldn't move. But it's different for everyone, and the first time I had no problems picking up Jensen, and with the twins I had no problems picking them up either. So yeah, different for everyone. How long until you can go and see your babies in NICU after your C-section? Now, I don't know the policy on this, so I can only speak from my own experience. Couldn't go down, I don't think, until I could actually get up out of bed. I think that was policy, because Jordan went down without me and his mum went in as well. And I think my mum maybe went in, but I didn't because I couldn't. And then I still had one twin with me at this point, but then the second twin went down to NICU. So as soon as I could get up, which was around 5 hours after my section, I could then get myself into a wheelchair and be wheeled down to NICU. Whether that's different for different places, I'm not sure. So I'm really not sure on the policy, but that's just what happened with me. What's the hardest part? What's the hardest part of a C-section? I'd say the hardest part of all my C-sections is that first moment you stand up. That is the hardest part for me. Can you breastfeed after a C-section? Yes, you can. In my experience, I had no issues with my colostrum coming in or my milk coming in. Yeah, it was completely fine to breastfeed after my C-section. Do you still get after pains? I can't believe I haven't spoke about after pains. They are so painful, and I guess I haven't spoke about them because they're not really they're not really just specified to a C-section. But wow, after pains, yeah, they're so painful, and they get worse the more babies you have. So if you just had one baby, you won't know what they are, but if you've had 2 to 3 babies, oh my god, after the twins, they were so painful. And I also got really bad trapped wind, which was agony. That was agony, and that was due to the C-section, all the air going in your stomach. That trapped wind was so painful, and I only got it on my 3rd C-section. People would say to me, oh, did you get trapped wind after your C-section? And I think, no, what are you talking about? But when you get it, you know about it. Would you recommend a C-section birth to someone? That's a really hard question to answer, because I've never had a vaginal delivery, and I would always say go with what your midwife and doctors say. I don't think it's recommended for you to just say, I want a C-section, I don't want a vaginal delivery, for kind of no reason other than you want a C-section. So that's a kind of impossible question to answer, because I wouldn't like to recommend it to someone just because they want one. If there is a medical need and they've got an option, and they're kind of swaying more towards a C-section, and they're being advised more to have a C-section, then I would say absolutely go for it. It's completely fine in my experience, but I wouldn't recommend it if you could have a vaginal delivery, just because that's what the doctors and the midwives recommend. My scar is very tight and always has an overhang. Your stomach looks so flat. My stomach is absolutely not flat. I just wear things that flatter it. A lot of my stuff is high-waisted, like the dress I've got on today is really floaty. I wouldn't wear something now that is completely tight with no support on my stomach, just because I do have an overhang, I do have loose skin. I'm completely fine with that, and time has made me feel fine with that, but my stomach is definitely not flat, no way. And as you say, my scar is really tight, like that bit of skin is really tight, and then the skin on top is really loose, so you have the overhang, and just the way it is, unfortunately. I don't believe there's any way you can get rid of it, because it is just loose skin. It's kind of loose skin and then really tight skin, which kind of causes the whole overhang. And unless, I think the only thing to get rid of it is a tummy tuck, which is quite a drastic step. I actually did think about having a tummy tuck after my 2nd C-section, because I hated my body that much. But with time, I've completely got used to it. And to be completely honest, as I have been in this video, I'm not kind of jumping around for joy saying I love my body. I have my hang-ups, I have my insecurities, like everyone probably. But it doesn't make me unhappy, which is, I think, the main thing for me. Is it as painful as people make out? That's a kind of different question. Yes, it is as painful as people make out. Yeah, the recovery can be really painful. The actual procedure is not painful, the injection is not painful, but the recovery is different for everyone, important to mention, and it is absolutely very painful, yes. And I don't want to scare anyone by saying that. I hope I'm not scaring anyone. I'm just being realistic. Is it manageable pain? Yes, it is, but it is painful. So manageable pain, but it is painful. You've been cut open, but you can manage it. So don't be worried or scared, because you will get through it. Had a question asking me the do's and don'ts of recovery. So the do's of recovery, it's going to be a really obvious one, but take it easy. And I'm my own worst enemy when I say that, because I always want to be doing something. I hate mess and things like that, so I always want to be getting up and cleaning it, but don't. Let someone else do that. And a don't is really obvious one. Don't do anything crazy, like try and walk too much, and I've definitely done that before. I remember I was a week post section with my second, so recovery wasn't as well as my first, and we went to visit Jordan's nan, and we went for a little walk, and why I did that I don't even know, because I was in agony. But you will learn these kind of little mistakes as you go along. I will leave a link in the description box to NHS advice on C-sections if you do want to do some further reading on the do's and don'ts and on all the things about it. But thank you so much for watching my video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it and took something away from it, and I'll see you guys soon.